Yes, please.
straight after. Right, it says it's recording, so we can do the intro and get started. Welcome back to Silicon Curtain and, of course, the Dictators on the channel of David Dubato. Please do check out the links in the description. I know if you're not following David's channel, then you will definitely find some real value from that. We are both co-hosting today and delighted to be joined by Ilya Ponomarev, who is a Russian-Ukrainian politician who was a member of the Russian State Duma from 2007 to 16 after the 2022 Russian invasion. He joined Ukraine's territorial defense forces and categorically denounced the invasion. That, of course, has made him a target, predictably enough. And it is a courageous moral stand. While he was a member of the Russian Duma, he was the only deputy not to vote in favour of the gay propaganda law and, of course, to vote against Russia's annexation of Crimea in March 2014. Ilya, I'm delighted to welcome you back.
Thanks for having me.
We are going to dive into as many issues as we can within the half hour we've got, but let's start with the state of brittleness of Putin's regime. We have just seen the largest Wildberries warehouse outside Moscow taken out. There was a lot of speculation about why that one hadn't been touched. Well, I guess they just wanted to marshal the forces and trick the air defense to the point where that could be done. It has now been done, and the rest of the warehouses are sure to follow, and those of Ozon as well. What do you think will be the effect on Putin's regime, if any? And what is the strategic purpose behind Ukraine's strikes?
First of all, I don't think there would be much of an impact on the Putin's regime per se, because Putin is stuck in the situation when there is not win-win but lose-lose. He cannot move anywhere. If he ends the war without victory, he's out. And that's kind of like quick end for him. Continuing the war, that's kind of a delayed end. Obviously, he's choosing delayed end rather than the immediate one. And that's why whatever troubles are coming into Russia in terms of economy, people become poorer. There is a certain dissatisfaction within the elites, which is rising, but it's all not immediate. It's all kind of deferred. And I would say that the strategic meaning of the attacks on the wild berries is different. Wild berries have turned themselves in a major distribution hub for defense-related articles, and they are helping to deliver items from China. In some cases, even I would say illegally deliver articles from China, because China itself is very cautious, in sense what they are doing and how they ship and whatever. So Wild Berries is doing a lot of dirty work in this sense. And so it's now being punished for this, and also as a lesson to other logistics and retail companies, like we mentioned, Ozon and others. So stay away from this subject. So that's, I think, the main strategic meaning. The rest, the only actor inside Russia which right now is capable to initiate a change, theoretically, I would say it's happening tomorrow, but theoretically is capable, is the Russian elites, is the large Russian businesses. And the only way to make them move is with fear for their personal safety, security, for their families, for their lifestyle. And right now, they fear regime more than they fear outside influence. And that's why nothing is moving.
Is there
Ilya,
any?
I agree
Mhm.
with what the Ukrainians are doing with the wild berries attacks, but not for what many of the Western pundits or analysts are saying. They're saying it's because it's going to make the Russian people rise up because they're losing their businesses and they're losing money, and therefore they can only take so much of this before they rise up against the Kremlin. I think that's utter nonsense. However, I think it's a good idea because, as you just said, wild berries has made themselves into one of the logistics centers for the Russian military. So I think in that sense, it's a great strategic move by Ukraine. But let me just ask you this. Is there, I have my own opinion, of course, is there at some point where the Russian people, the average Russian person, not the elite, the oligarchs or the
Mhm.
security services, get fed up where they're saying this war just isn't worth it anymore and we're going to do something about it? I don't think we're anywhere near that, but maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
Look, I think that we always need to learn from history lessons. Remember World War II. Remember the massive attacks on Hamburg, on Dresden, on Königsberg, on other cities. Did it make ordinary Germans turn against Hitler? No, rather the other way around. Because they started to see that the revenge is coming. So they started to feel less safe. They started to be more angry with the Allied forces. So they actually committed more to the front and to the defense of the country. And I think that with Russians, what is happening is exactly the same. Yeah, it's the question of like whom to blame and whom to fear. I just recently met with one guy who was still shuttling back and forwards to Russia. Obviously nobody in Russia knows that we are talking, and he said, recently when I was flying into Russia, our plane was diverted because of the drones attack on one of the Russian cities. So they denied landing and diverted the plane to another city. And then we had to stay there for some 20 hours in the airport. And only then we were allowed to fly and finally got back. So everybody was extremely annoyed. But was it a single person in the airplane which blamed the government, Putin, the war? Not a single person. So there's no complaints at all. It was always there were complaints in the past. When there was air company which is doing something wrong. Here, everything was completely quiet, and it was not because they were fearful of saying something about Putin. It was even psychologically they were pushing it out of their conscience that the origin of this problem is within the war and with their inability to stop the war. They feel like they cannot influence the war anyway. And in this situation, whom they're blaming Ukrainians because it's their immediate action, which is causing troubles for them personally. So no, it's not. It would not result in any changes. Actually, that's one of the most common to me mistakes of some of the members of Russian opposition, which is why very widespread. They are now circling all the world parliaments and whatever and saying the majority of Russians are against the war and they want to end it. And they're right in this sense. The majority of Russians indeed want to end the war, but they want to end the war on their terms. They want to end the war with victory. They don't want Russia to lose. The percentage of people who stood on the position that Russia should lose because it's a criminal war and stuff like this, it's pretty stable. It was 20%, it remains 20%. Yeah, now we have a lot of more people who want to end the war, and if we expect the criticism to come against the existing government and against Putin personally, is for inability to win, not for the initiating this war in the very first place.
Now, Ukrainians, of course, understand more about the sort of psychology and the systema that we're talking about here, so they probably don't think these strikes are going to initiate a revolution or anything like that, unlike it is some of the opposition and pundits. However, there may be a strategic purpose here that they think possibly a systemic banking crisis may result, from these attacks. VTB, for instance, has taken a large stake in Wildberries, and that's not going to be yielding much in the way of profits. And that also talks to your idea there about this distribution network becoming sort of quasi state supported and military in its function. But again, Western analysts tend to talk about that if there was a systemic banking crisis, that Russia would collapse in the way that a Western democracy would collapse. Is it not the case that actually the regime itself may harden into something more Stalinist, more authoritarian, more focused actually on executing and perpetuating the war?
No, everybody wants to believe in what he wants to believe, in what he is comfortable in believing in. And that's exactly what is happening. And the West, yes, it hopes that, a little bit more push and the economy would collapse, and we don't need to do nothing. The truth is very sad, but it didn't change for many, many years. The only way to change this war is the regime change in Russia. And the regime change would not be within the elections, happening from within, just for no reason. No, it has to be planned, orchestrated, directed, supported, and only then it would actually happen. So I think that's the biggest mistake that is happening during this war, and that's a mistake on both the Western nations and on Ukraine, that people do not believe in reality of the regime change. They fear to be personally involved in it. Some politicians are directly afraid for personal retaliation coming from Moscow on them if they are involved in orchestrating any kind of a regime change. And that's why, even Ukraine is not doing much in that direction. And I think that right now it's pretty clear that in the front line, this equilibrium can hold for quite a while. Again, let's remember World War I in this case. When the revolution happened in Germany, German troops were on French territory. They were not on German territory. The front lines were. So, visually, everything was great. It's in the same fashion as right now for Russia, the troops are on Ukrainian territory. They are not on Russian territory. And nevertheless, in Germany in 1918, the revolution happened, and it was very much not just for internal factors, but for external factors that were the triggers of the revolution. This is exactly something that we need to work on if we want the war to end.
Ilya, I don't see Putin voluntarily leaving ever, really, and
Yes.
unless there is a Ukrainian or a Russian defeat, which I don't see happening right now either, because NATO hasn't gotten its act together yet, and Ukraine's just not able. Do you see that there's any way, realistically, for the West, collectively, the West to strangle the economy of Russia, if they did what they should do? Do you see that could strangle the economy to the point that Putin would either be forced to resign, I guess, by not the oligarchs perhaps, but the Siloviki? Do you think an economic collapse could trigger regime change?
Look, within your question, you very professionally changed subjects. Whether the economy would struggle and deteriorate, yes, it's very much a possibility. That's what we are doing, and that's what's happening in front of our eyes. And the budget losing money and becoming from deficit from profit to deficit. So the country would live poorer than it lived, before. That's no doubt. Does it mean that the economy collapses? No. There's two different stories. And my belief, yes, if it is the real collapse of the economy, like people have nothing to eat, even if they really fear that tomorrow they have nothing to eat. February Revolution in 1917 in Russia also started not from real hunger, but from people's expectations of hunger, and actually false expectations of hunger, but the expectations were wide spread, and that's why the revolution has started. So if we will come to the situation that ordinary Russians and the elites, they really see that, okay, it is the collapse, it is the end, most likely we will see the uprising. But whether I believe that it's feasible within the next 1 to 3 years, no, I don't think it is feasible. I think that the internal market is large enough. A lot of services, not just manufacturing. A lot of trade partners for Russia still exists. China, India, Africa, Latin America, of course, yeah, not European Union, but European Union as well, by the way, still has certain trade with Russia. Still enough markets, and that's why enough money in the economy. Yeah, it would be worse, but not to that degree. And that's why I think that the realistic way to trigger things is to instill fear within the elites. And also, it's always, a negative and the positive motivation should exist. Again, turning to the example of February 1917 revolution in Russia, in Russian Empire, it was originally a conspiracy on the top of people who said, like, okay, we cannot win this war, World War One, because Tsar is too weak. We need to change things to win the war. They were not for Russia to leave fighting, but vice versa. To win the war, we need to change the regime. And that actually triggered the dramatic social process that resulted in October Revolution and Bolsheviks come into power. But originally there were no Bolsheviks at all in the picture. It was all conspiracy at the top. This is something that can be done now without any significant problem. It just would be a year and a half of concentrated work. It's all feasible. It just needs to demonstrate the commitment and resolve on behalf of consolidated West, that the West decided about the regime change and is ready to reward those part of the elites which would help to achieve it. They would be safe, and that they would be rewarded. And then you would see a significant portion of Russian elites flipping.
But of course, there's no appetite, no leadership for that whatsoever. And it includes in Belarus, where the demonstrators were encouraged not to use Maidan methods to overthrow Lukashenko, and as a result lost. I mean,
Belarus is a different story, because Belarus does not decide nothing, and in Belarus, Russia is an external factor. So if in Belarus, for one or another reason right now, like just let's imagine this, the government would totally change tomorrow, there would be a successful revolution. We understand that the next day it would be the invasion from Moscow, which would change the situation back, and the situation would get even worse than it is right now under Lukashenko. And that's a very major deferring factor which constrains many people. So the key problem, the origin of the problem, and the solution of the problem is in Moscow.
So we're treating Russia still using what could be called vegetarian methods, and it seems to me that many in the Russian opposition are also, not yourself included in that, are still sticking to liberal ideals or methods that could be described as vegetarian, but they are fighting a fully carnivorous beast, which is Putin and his Siloviki sort of behind that. I mean, it'd be great to hear you comment on that, but also that means that Putin has probably not reached, the maximum of internal repression. He's not reached the maximum of external provocation in order to perpetuate his regime and the war. So what can we expect from him over the next year if this economic situation is to get tougher and he's going to maybe out of paranoia feel there's certain discontent? Where could he go in terms of provoking Europe, in terms of internal repression, to stay in control?
Well, look, first of all, I don't think that Putin is stupid. He's pretty cautious person in general, and a rational guy, and he understands the psychology very well. This is one thing which he is really good at is in psychology. And he understands that if he pushes too hard, he would generate way more coherent resistance. It would be a pushback. And he tries not to cross a certain psychological line in this. And with all actually stratas of the society, for the most, I would say, vegetarian opposition, he is trying to keep an illusion that, you would be excluded from, many areas of activities, but still, it's not that we are throwing you all into jail. You can still survive within the country, and there are people who are opposition-minded. Where this 20% of anti-war people coming from? They do exist in the country. They're just keeping their lips shut, and they're engaged in different what we call the small causes. Different volunteer work, different social activities. So they're still doing something which they like to do. Fighting for ecology, for example, or something else. Just don't touch the political issues, and then you can survive. So that creates one area. For other people, he still has the co-optation in the State Duma of these fake opposition parties. So also, some people are there. They may be very much against the government. They are not against the war. As soon as you may be even against the war deep inside. But as soon as you vote properly on the foreign policy issues, you can still conduct a lot of opposition activities against the government economic policies. And even enjoy being a member of parliament. Such a imitational democracy, imitational opposition. And on the foreign issues, Putin also understands that if he would create a campaign of mass terror against opposition leaders or maybe some military facilities in the West, that may trigger a lot of pushback and activities inside Russia by the foreign nations. So that's why he does enough to remind about the danger, so to instill this fear in generally peaceful foreign politicians, foreign bureaucracy, and, by the way, Russian liberal emigres which are in the West. So remember, we can come to you with Novichok, but unfulfilled threat is always more efficient than the one which already realized. And say we in Ukraine, I'm taking a very radical position because I'm in Ukraine, and they're already there. The missiles already coming. The explosions I heard. People are dying, so we need to do something. But for those which emigrated, to London, they can enjoy, sitting in the pub, smoking a cigar, and saying, okay, we will wait, 3 years from now we will do this, and if it would not happen, okay, we still have kids to educate, and other stuff to do. That's what's happening.
Ilya, my last question, because I know we're up against the clock. Most, if not all Ukrainians believe that there's no way to deal with Russia after Putin leaves and hopefully a Ukrainian victory until Russia is razed to the ground, that they can't leave any of the current political infrastructure, governmental infrastructure in place. I believe that you're saying that that's not the way to go, that there are going to be people there, the oligarchs are still going to be there, and that the West should work with them to build a better, hopefully more democratic Russia. Do I read you correct, or do I have that wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. My point is that if you apply pressure on graphite, you would turn it into diamond. But if you put this pressure not uniformly and you try to split it, it appears that it's very soft. And Putin's Russia is the colossus on the clay legs. And it can collapse very easily. You just need to be smart, and not blind in terms of our policies. There are a lot of people who can defect. There are a lot of people who can revolt. Yes, the change needs to come from within the country, but to stimulate this process, It needs to be helped again, like it was in many Russian revolutions in the past, 1905, 1917, and others, 1991.
Do you see a scenario where Putin tries a little harder to deter Western allies from supporting Ukraine? One thinks in particular Britain, who has had a role actually in the long-range sanctions, the long-range strikes against Russia, and I believe they are quite sort of upset about that. Lavrov's statements sort of indicate that, and there's a veiled threat within there. However, we've not invested in our air defense. Are they likely to strike us in some form of retribution or deterrent?
Strike, no. Provocations, definitely yes. But all these threats, they're empty threats. They sound from 2022. These last Chinese warnings we hear all the time. Nothing happens and nothing would happen because, again, Putin doesn't want to cross the red line. He understands that to scare your politicians and your bureaucracy is easier with words than with deeds when it would have to react because of the public opinion. So no direct attack is possible. But the threats and the provocations would escalate for sure.
And there are many hybrid incidents, but we are failing to attribute them to Russia, even though it's implausible it was anybody else.
Yeah. 100%.
Ilya, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank
David,
you.
thank you so much for co-hosting.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
Massive pleasure.
Care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.